Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute, JohnJDwyer.com, me, Gwen Faulconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwoods, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with award-winning author and historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. Here now on Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history by the stories we learn. John J. Dwyer? I kind of know this name, but why should I know it?
Well, I wonder, Gwen, indeed, how many of us in the 21st century could name the man who was one of Oklahoma's first pair of United States senators, was blind, and was a true pioneer of the Sooner State. Likely very few of us. Yet Thomas Pryor Gore was known to earlier generations of Oklahomans and Americans as the famed blind orator. And though unable to see, he was a true pioneer who helped raise Lawton from the barren shortgrass prairie of the Southern Plains. And had he not dueled in mortal political combat with two of the most powerful presidents in American history, only death might have removed him from that exalted office of U.S. Senator. Subjected to the additional suffering of having lost the sight that he actually possessed early in life, Gore lost his vision one eye at a time in not one but two freak childhood accidents.
Oh.
The sight in his remaining good eye gradually faded until none remained at age 20, yet he rarely, if ever, complained. The greatest service which the sighted can render the sightless is to help them help themselves, Gore said. This is better than charity. Instead, he labored to make something of himself in the still ravaged post-Civil War South, and he labored until the end of his life that he might contribute good to the lives of all his fellow Oklahomans. He moved to Corsicana, Texas from Mississippi as a young man. Then he heard that a final tract of land, formed by the Apache, Kiowa, and Comanche reservations and comprising most of future southwest Oklahoma, would be opened in 1901. Rather than another rowdy land run, as we've talked about in other Oklahoma Gold episodes, however, this opening would be conducted by lottery. Envisioning the opportunity to build a great new American state, the young man persuaded his father to accompany him north, across Red River, and the sprawling Oklahoma Territory prairie in a small wagon. He purchased a town lot, and with it, his earthly destiny. I located at Lawton before there was any Lawton, the young pioneer wrote. There were only two little shacks on the town site where I located my tent. The bluegrass was waist high on most of the town site, particularly where there were hog wallers, end quote. Yes, he could see none of it himself, but he could describe it so that generations of later Oklahomans could see it. Within months of settling in Lawton, Gore attended the territorial convention of the Democratic Party in Enid. His oratorical power already gaining renown, the delegates selected the 22-year-old Gore to speak for them in response to the host's welcome. Memorable and stirring lines filled the impromptu address, totally ad lib, given as only a blind man could give it with no notes. Gore biographer Monroe Billington wrote that many of the future leaders of Oklahoma who attended this convention considered it the finest piece of oratory they ever heard. Gore would have the opportunity and motivation to make good on such appraisals of his talent, Gwen, as the age of progressivism and the government interventionist political leaders it spawned from both major parties, including the Roosevelts and Wilson, ascended. Gore grew increasingly skeptical of the ability of an increasingly unwieldy and, in his opinion, decreasingly constitutional federal government to solve the country's problems better than could its people. Well, that proved a perilous philosophy to hold in early 20th century America. Gore served 2 stints in the U.S. Senate, of 14 and 6 years, respectively. Both times he eventually opposed powerful presidents in his own party, whom he had initially supported and defended. In each case, he grew to believe that they plied the domestic power of the federal government with unprecedented and unwarranted authority and dragged his country toward war. The first was Woodrow Wilson, who led the country into World War I. The second, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led it during World War II. Both times, the Democrats rallied to defend their president and raised up well-financed senatorial primary opponents who defeated Gore.
Thomas P. Gore.
That's correct. Turning on Gore proved an indicative, Gwen, of the invective he drew was a March 1920 newspaper article from the pro-Wilson Mountain Park Herald. It was entitled, "Gore Flooding the State with Political Dope." It ridiculed him as a blind Demosthenes, a smear invoking the ancient Greek orator. In addition, Gore's grandson, the famed novelist Gore Vidal, recalled in a 2009 interview with me that Wilson offered Gore, while still senator, a spot on the U.S. Supreme Court, which the Oklahoman turned down, to get rid of one of his enemies and put him on the court. A classic move, Gore Vidal said. Regarding the second president whom Gore opposed, Vidal mused to me in his wry way, he only differed with Roosevelt on very important things. Among those things were Roosevelt's historic New Deal program of vast government control of the national economy and his later aggressive and secretive efforts to involve the pre-Pearl Harbor attack United States in World War II. "I tell you mothers now," Gore memorably declared in 1919 following World War I, with his Senate seat already in jeopardy, "I will never rob your cradles to gorge the dogs of war," end quote. And by the way, you can watch that speech, including that memorable quote, on a film at the History Center in Oklahoma City. Well, 2 decades later, Thomas P. Gore opposed Franklin D. Roosevelt from the same political and moral point of view. And after the break, we'll explore his long and lonely and very noble pursuit of justice for Oklahoma's Native Americans.
Did you interview Gore Vidal?
I sure did. It took me 9 months to get it set up, but then I had a 45-minute telephone conversation with him from his home in California.
And he was very proud of his grandfather.
He was very proud. In fact, I'll never forget the first thing Gore Vidal said to me when we got on the line. He said, "Well, how are things in the old country?" He remembered, the use of the word country back in the day was not a nation. It was a place of geographical folkways and tradition and customs, a way of talking that were similar. That would be basically a region, we would call it now.
And today, if you go to Lawton, there is Gore Boulevard in honor of our subject today, Thomas P. Gore. We'll have more and the Golden Nugget. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history with the stories we remember. John J. Dwyer, did you say that Thomas P. Gore turned down an appointment to the Supreme Court?
According to his grandson, Gore Vidal, the famous novelist who I interviewed in 2009 for nearly an hour, that's exactly right. They were trying to get him to back off his opposition to Woodrow Wilson's intentions to get the United States into World War I.
What happened to him?
Well, he was retired, but he exhibited, and the reason for that, he exhibited to the peril of his political career, opposition to some of the most powerful state and national leaders of the 20th century, including powerful presidents. But he was also the savior of the Indians, even after death. His grandson, Gore Vidal, recalled to me in that 2009 interview. And by the way, I knew nothing about this before that interview, but studied a lot after it. When the senator, Gore Vidal went on, was practicing law in Washington, D.C., after he left the Senate, one case that he just kept on with, even though the tribes had no money, He went after all the federal money that the feds had stolen from the tribes because of the various treaties, which nobody paid any attention to. And the senator was outraged by it, and he did something about it until the day he died. That's the end of Gore Vidal's quote. And he always called his grandfather the senator. And he told me how he used to read to his grandfather hours upon end, everything from the congressional record to classical works of antiquity. That's how Thomas Gore himself was able to read. His grandson, Gore Vidal, read to him. Well, Thomas P. Gore did a landmark series of claims on behalf of the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache tribes for proper compensation for about 20 million acres of land in Oklahoma and several other states, which they claimed the federal government had defrauded them out of through a series of broken treaties dating all the way back to 1865. Possessing no native blood himself, he harbored a lifelong respect and feeling for them. And obviously this was long before casinos and the political power the tribes have now. Thomas Gore fought long and hard for the natives when it was not a popular thing to do. When the senator died, Gore Vidal told me, they were moving toward judgment or damages from the federal government. End quote. Indeed they were, but it would be 1974, more than 30 years after the cases were filed, before the United States Indian Claims Commission entered a landmark judgment against the United States. And according to the Washington Post newspaper, persistent lobbying by Gore and his assistant, J. Ray Thompson, led to the 1946 creation of the Indian Claims Commission by Congress in the first place. That was, again, spearheaded that effort to make that happen by Gore. The tribes were awarded more than $43 million in 1940s money. It has been said Thomas told the commission regarding himself and the long-deceased Gore long dead at that point, quoting Thompson, that an attorney who prosecutes an Indian claim against the United States should be wise as Solomon, have the patience of Job, and live to be as old as Methuselah. This case demonstrates its truth, end quote. By the 1940s, though, Thomas Gore doubted he could carry a single precinct in Oklahoma in a Democratic Party election. So out of touch was he with the political and social times in his belief, according to his biographer Billington, that large government giveaways would destroy the self-reliance and self-respect of the individual. There was no place on the Oklahoma political scene for one who voiced loud suspicion of President Roosevelt's leadership, Billington summarized. And yet, Gwen, time has proven the truth of much of what Thomas Gore said. Indeed, he never gave up. Convinced that the president purposed to maneuver America into the war, which it turns out was true, perhaps to deliver it from the seemingly endless Great Depression, Gore declared that, quote, the dictator, Roosevelt, having won all the triumphs and trophies of peace, now desires to add martial splendor to his accumulated glories. Selah, end quote. Well, Gwen, whether we like him or not, love or despise or are indifferent to his views, Thomas P. Gore's greatest anachronism was his character, that of an elected leader, we might dare say statesman in his case, unafraid to hew to his considered course, even in the face of harrowing opposition, ridicule, the looming loss of an office where he passionately wanted to serve, and perhaps worse, irrelevance, at least of the temporary sort. His face, with its unseeing eyes, did not grace the front of our money or history books like some of his famous adversaries. For the discerning, however, his legacy bequeaths far richer gifts, including the nobility of overcoming great handicaps and obstacles, standing with courage on behalf of the powerless and against the sometimes misguided tide of the majority, and never backing down, no matter the cost to oneself. Thomas P. Gore, like so much shining Oklahoma gold, long buried and forgotten, but now perhaps at least somewhat resurrected in the memory of a state who has unknowingly benefited greatly from him.
Thomas P. Gore. Now that's Oklahoma gold.